Hi, and welcome to Power Play. I'm Mike LeCouteur. Tonight, the Carney-Trump face-to-face.
My government is getting to work to build big, bold, and build now.
Prime Minister Mark Carney is heading to Washington on Tuesday for a sit-down with U.S. President Donald Trump. In moments, we'll preview those high-stakes talks with America's most recent ambassador to Canada, David Cohen. Then, Pierre Poilievre is heading west to run again. The Conservative leader has found a riding to run in. MP-elect Damien Carrick steps aside for Poilievre. It's a safe seat, with Carrick winning it on Monday with 80% of the vote. We'll break down that decision with pollster Shachi Kurl. Plus, questions for opposition parties. Our front bench digs into the next steps for both the Conservatives and NDP. Both parties are looking for interim leaders, and the New Democrats could be looking for a new direction. First, though,
we're meeting as heads of our government to discuss that partnership. Now, I'm not pretending those discussions will be easy, or they won't proceed in a straight line. There'll be zigs and zags, ups and downs. But as I said in my remarks, I will fight for the best deal for Canada, and only accept the best deal for Canada, and take as much time that's necessary.
That was Prime Minister Mark Carney today, managing expectations for his meeting next week with U.S. President Donald Trump. Carney says he wants to get a deal for Canada, but he isn't saying that will happen on Tuesday when he heads to Washington. The central issue of that meeting will be the ongoing trade war with the U.S., which continues to have negative impacts on this side of the border. General Motors announcing this morning it's cutting a full shift at its Oshawa assembly plant this fall. It's expected to impact hundreds of workers at the plant and many more at suppliers, a move that the union calls reckless.
I'll just express my deepest, sympathy for them and their families. A very difficult time. We are committed to supporting workers. All the dollars from our tariffs going to support workers. Fighting hard for our auto sector, all our sectors, in these negotiations with the Americans, and making sure that companies act in true partnership as well in maintaining employment and investment in Canada. And if not, there will be consequences for those companies.
So there is a lot riding on that meeting between President Trump and Prime Minister Mark Carney. Now, Carney has also said the relationship as we know it between the two countries is over. So should Canadians temper their expectations? Joining me now to talk more about this is the last U.S. ambassador to Canada, David Cohen. Ambassador, welcome back to Power Play.
Well, thanks very much for having me, and I smile as you say that. It wasn't that long ago, and there certainly felt like happier days, although there were plenty of days when people were upset with me and President Biden as well, and there may be a little bit of a moral to that story, that every day isn't going to be happiness and sunshine, but that doesn't mean that happiness and sunshine can't return overall.
Certainly, and we are thrilled to have you back here. And I wanted to ask you about how President Trump has been speaking glowingly of Prime Minister Carney in the lead up to this meeting, especially when you compare it to how Trump spoke about former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Do you take this as a signal of a resetting of the relations between the two countries?
So I need to start with a qualifier, which I know you know, which is I'm no longer the U.S. ambassador to Canada, so I can't speak officially for the United States, and I certainly can't speak officially for President Trump. But I'm a big believer that relationships matter. It is the beginning of any conversation, and the beginning of any relationship is any personal chemistry and personal respect that may exist between leaders. And although I don't want to speculate as to causes or the impact of this, I think it's pretty clear that President Trump and Prime Minister Trudeau did not have the greatest of relationships. And it certainly seems like there's a much better relationship between President Trump and Prime Minister Carney, a relationship that seems to be based on more respect. I've seen speculated here in the United States that President Trump tends to respect leaders who come from a business background, as he did. And obviously, Mark Carney has a distinguished record in business. And Prime Minister Trudeau was a lifelong elected official with no business background. And I think you've seen the way in which the president talks about Mark Carney seems to reflect that respect. He said it at this week's cabinet meeting with his cabinet that he'd spoken with Prime Minister Carney, who seemed to be a nice gentleman. He has only referred to Mark Carney as the prime minister, not as governor. So I think there is all sorts of evidence that there is at least the beginning of a respectful and civil relationship between Prime Minister Carney and President Trump, and that has to be good for getting this relationship back to a decent footing.
So when you consider what has happened to other world leaders who have sat in that Oval Office next to President Trump, what do you think that Prime Minister Carney has to be careful of going in there?
Well, of course, I haven't been physically in any of those meetings, and I will admit to not, for my mental health, not watching cable news 24 hours a day, which is something I did in a different part of my life. So I can't even say that I've seen everything, but my advice to anyone meeting with the President of the United States, with any President of the United States, is to be respectful and to approach the meeting understanding that President Trump has objectives that he needs to achieve for the American people. But by the same token, there is nothing wrong with being firm and being clear in the interests of Canada that Prime Minister Carney wants to and needs to represent. The language I've seen Prime Minister Carney use seems to me to be about as perfect a set of language as you can have, which is to make clear to the president that he's going to stand up for Canada's interests. Doesn't mean that you have to be disrespectful or uncivil in having those discussions. It doesn't mean that you can't praise the importance and the value of the relationship between our two countries and the many good things that have happened between the United States and Canada, and the value that the United States brings to Canada, as well as the value that Canada brings to the United States. And so, and the sincere desire to have a conversation about what this relationship should look like. And I think that's the right way and the best way to approach President Trump as well.
But when you hear Prime Minister Carney say that the relationship as we know it is over, what does that signal to you about what Canada's frame of mind is going into this and what success looks like coming out of it?
So I have enormous respect for Prime Minister Carney. I met him obviously before he was Prime Minister. I think he ran a great campaign. I think he has an incredible grasp of financial and economic issues. I think he demonstrated that in his first-time election, he has an equally incredible grasp of politics and how to conduct politics and foreign affairs. It doesn't mean that I'm going to agree with absolutely every word that he says. And I have said that I think an absolutist statement like the relationship between Canada and the United States is over is probably a bit of an overstatement. It may feel like it's over today, which is an important data point for President Trump and for Americans.
Yeah, and in fairness, Ambassador, he says the relationship as we know it is over. And I just want to make sure that that is clear for everyone.
Right. Because we've talked before. I've been on this show many times. I think I've developed a bit of a reputation of being a glass half full kind of a guy and not a glass half empty kind of a guy. And I have an abiding expectation and hope and aspiration that the relationship between Canada and the United States can be put back together into being a strong, productive, positive relationship. And I think that Prime Minister Carney's comments are meant, if for nothing else, but to set an expectation on the United States side about how strongly Canada feels about how they're being treated by the United States. By the same token, a lot of the fears of horrible tariffs, by way of example, just to take one issue, have actually not come to pass for Canada. There were no reciprocal tariffs imposed on Canada, certainly nothing like 145% tariffs like the tariffs that were imposed on China. Even the automobile tariffs, which is, Canada's number one or number two industry, depending on the day on which you do the calculation. There were exemptions put in on the 25% tariffs for trade pursuant to the USMCA. And even last night, the president announced not even a moratorium, but the cessation of tariffs on automobile parts that were going across our border subject to USMCA. So there've been a lot of announcements. There've been a lot of significant tariff announcements. I think I challenge anyone to give me a definitive answer as to exactly what tariffs that have been announced apply to Canada at this point, because it is a bit of a moving target, and it shows, I think, if I were Prime Minister Carney, I would look at all that, and it shows a certain flexibility and willingness by President Trump to have rational discussions about a trade deal and a trade relationship between Canada and the United States.
Ambassador, we're going to have to leave it there, but I did want to underline that the reason that we keep having you on is because of that glass half full attitude. I appreciate your candor. I appreciate your time as well. And thank you for being with us, former ambassador, U.S. ambassador to Canada, David Cohen.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you taking the time.
I know we're out of time. If I could just one quick thing, which I think is important for me to say, and hopefully once he settles in, you'll have a chance to do this. I do think Ambassador Hoekstra is a good man, will be an excellent United States ambassador for Canada. He has President Trump's ear, and he has an ability to talk with him. And I've been extremely impressed in all of my conversations with him. I know when he was announced, people pointed out that there was optimism. He's from Michigan, which is a border state, and that there was a hope that he understood the importance and the nuance of the U.S.-Canada relationship. And I will tell you that in my conversations with him, that prediction is absolutely true. And I think you'll find, and Canadians will find, that you've just got an excellent representative of President Trump serving as the U.S. ambassador to Canada.
And I appreciate you adding that, Ambassador. Thanks so much, and take care of yourself.
Thank you, and thanks for having me on.
So that meeting with the U.S. president was announced this morning by Mark Carney at his first press conference since Monday's election. Now, the Prime Minister wasted no time sketching out a busy month of May. Here are some of the key dates. Now, after next week's White House visit, Carney says he'll swear in his new cabinet in the week of May the 12th. He'll bring the House of Commons back on May the 26th, and the following day, we're going to get a throne speech delivered by King Charles III, who is coming for a royal visit.
During elections, Canadians play and cheer for different teams. Now that election is over, and we are in a once-in-a-lifetime crisis. It's time together, it's time to come together, to put on our Team Canada sweaters and win big.
There's a lot to break down, and we have CTV News national correspondent Abigail Beeman to do just that. Abigail, let's start with the King visit. Big day for a lot of people, and historic as well.
That's right. So we haven't had the monarch deliver the speech from the throne since 1977. That was the last time. And we heard from Prime Minister Mark Carney that he invited King Charles to do it. And we now know that the King and Queen will be here in Canada for 2 days, the 26th and the 27th, and that the King will deliver the speech from the throne. So as you say, a lot of excitement about that from royal watchers. And the Prime Minister made a point of saying that this act underlines our sovereignty. And he was pressed a bit about that. He didn't say too much more. I've been speaking with some constitutional experts who say that there is a lot of symbolism and meaning in this moment, in the position Canada is juxtaposed with the United States, but also not to take too much out of it, that it's a meaningful moment and has some symbolism, but shouldn't be read as much more than that.
Yeah, and Mark Carney moving very, very quickly with what he wants to do and what he's trying to accomplish. At the same time, he drew some very clear lines in the sand about any kind of coalition or any type of teaming up in the House of Commons. Talk to us a little bit about that.
So he was asked point blank whether he would have a governing deal with the NDP, and the answer was no. And then the reporter said, why not? And he fired back quickly, why? So he shut that down pretty clearly. He then went on to talk about the clear platform that the Liberals had run on and the win that they made, and that it wasn't necessary. And to your point about how Mark Carney laid out all those points and the things he wanted to achieve, you know, it's something that I heard from the Prime Minister throughout the election campaign in terms of wanting to be a government that was about action rather than just talk. So it will be interesting to watch this and see whether he actually performs on all these things that he has laid out.
And just before we let you go, we know that there will be a cabinet, and that is the week of the 12th. He was asked today about who may or may not be in it. Have a listen to this.
Can we expect your cabinet to be larger than your previous one, and will François-Philippe Champagne remain as finance minister?
Did he ask you to ask that question? Now we know your sources. Yeah. We will look. I committed to an efficient cabinet, a focused cabinet, cabinet with parity, gender parity, and we'll work towards it. Those final decisions haven't been made.
So, Abigail, despite the speculation, they're obviously not tipping his hat at all.
No, not at all. What you played there is the exact summation of everything that we heard on cabinet there, except I think he also said that Minister Champagne will have to wait and see, along with everybody else, whether he retains that finance minister title.
Yeah, whether he wants it or not at this point. CTV National News correspondent Abigail Beeman, thanks so much for this. Appreciate it. We're going to have a lot more on all of this just a little later on in the show with our front bench, Sabrina Grover, Melanie Paradis, and Gurdatin Singh. They will be here a little bit later on. First, though, Poilievre's heading to Alberta. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is getting another chance at a seat in the House of Commons. We're going to break down the move with pollster Shachi Kurl right here on Power Play after this. Big news from the federal Conservatives today as the MP-elect Damien Carrick said he's going to give up his Alberta riding so that Pierre Poilievre can run for that seat. The Conservative leader posted on social media today saying, "It is with humility and appreciation that I've accepted Damien Carrick's offer to resign his seat in Battle River Crowfoot so that I can work to earn the support of citizens there to serve them in Parliament." Damien's selfless act to step aside temporarily as Member of Parliament shows his commitment to change and restoring Canada's promise. He went on to say, "I will work to earn the trust of the good people of Battle River Crowfoot, and I will continue to hold the Liberal minority government to account until the next federal election, when we will bring real change to all Canadians." Now today, Prime Minister Mark Carney said he'll call that by-election as soon as possible.
I've already indicated to Mr. Poilievre that if it's the decision of him and the Conservative Party to trigger, if I can put it that way, a by-election, I will ensure that it happens as soon as possible. Okay. No games, nothing, straight.
To call this particular riding safe for the Conservatives is a bit of an understatement. On Monday, the party won it with 81.8% of the vote. Joining me now is Shachi Kurl, the president of the Angus Reid Institute. Welcome back to Power Play. How you doing?
Always good to be with you, Mike.
So Battle River Crowfoot is 2,000 kilometers from Poilievre's current riding of Carleton. It's also the safest Conservative riding in this country. Is that the simple answer for why Pierre Poilievre is going there to run in a by-election?
I mean, I think we both know that's a better answer to put to Mr. Poilievre directly, but better question rather. But I would say that Sure. I mean, efficacy would definitely be a part of this. Parliament is being recalled. Mark Carney is wanting to get going with his agenda. He held his first press conference this morning, as I'm sure you've already talked about. And so we are into a place where it does not do, and it will not do for the person who wants to stay on as leader of the Conservative Party to not have a place in Parliament, not be able to really be the person managing and conducting his caucus in the business of Parliament. You know, the ins and outs, committee level tactics and strategies, ensuring, especially for newer rookie MPs, that, you know, they're showing up for votes on time, all of those things. Some of that, the work can be the work of the House leader, but of course, you know, Poilievre is going to want to be able to demonstrate to Canadians that here he is in the House with his expanded caucus, doing the work of the opposition. Maybe not the place he wanted to be, but certainly that's what he's going to have to show. And we recognize and remember the extent to which Jagmeet Singh, now the outgoing NDP leader, struggled early on in his time as NDP leader, not having a seat in Parliament.
Yeah, I'm interested, though. This type of move doesn't happen very often. I mean, frankly, the leader of a party normally wins his own seat. So what do you think could be the reaction from voters in that riding who just voted for Damien Couric?
I mean, my understanding is that that is a riding that votes very enthusiastically Conservative and has done so over several terms. So I don't anticipate that this is going to be something that ruffles too many feathers in that riding. But hey, you couldn't take Nepean for granted. Sorry, you couldn't take Carleton for granted.
True.
So you certainly can't take Crowfoot for granted either. But I would say that that's less of a bar than the leader of the party being stuck outside the chamber would be. And, you know, there is precedent. There have been plenty of situations where newly elected leaders in leadership races have needed to ask a caucus member to stand down, step aside. Jean Chrétien was a leader without a seat in the early parts of his leadership, particularly just after 1990. Had to run, I believe, in New Brunswick before coming back to his old riding of Shawinigan. It has happened before. It probably will happen again. A little bit lack of, you know, not exactly ideal if you're Pierre Poilievre, but, you know, he doesn't really have the time at this moment to be too choosy about the instrument by which he returns into the parliamentary chamber.
Yeah, and I was struck by how Prime Minister Carney said, look, I'm not going to play any games here. I'm going to do this as soon as I can. I'm going to call a by-election so that Mr. Poilievre can come into the House of Commons. Polling data from your firm shows that 9 in 10 Canadians are concerned about the prospect of a recession within a year. So how much pressure will there be on all political leaders, do you think, to make this parliament work when it is all finally constituted again?
Look, I think that the tone change that Mark Carney signaled during the campaign, it was a lot less flinty, a lot less in terms of its tone, not necessarily the policies or the positioning, but in terms of tone towards Poilievre, and in turn, you know, we saw the handshake at the debate, for example. I think Carney certainly, and maybe Mr. Poilievre as well, have started to understand the assignment around now is not the time to revert to tactics of the past where both leaders are kind of going nya, nya, nya at each other, that there is an expectation on part of Canadians that this parliament does need to work, that these are busy and serious times, that there are greater issues at play than who's up and who's down in terms of scoring political points. And I think that Carney is signaling that he's you know, trying to take the tone and elevate it, and maybe take the snark and bring that down a little bit, and bring a level of political maturity to this working parliament. We'll see how it lasts.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that people that you're polling would probably want to see that as well, considering how worried they are about the economy at this point as well.
Of course, different support bases will always blame the other. So conservatives, do tend to look to the Liberals as being responsible for that lowering of tone, and vice versa. Liberal voters tend to say that it's on the Conservatives. But ultimately, you do see broad consensus around wanting to see the level of cooperative politics improve, and particularly after a hard-fought election. This is a time where, yes, the serious issues are there. Canadians are concerned about the prospect of a recession. They continue to have a lot of anxiety around the impact of tariffs. We saw more job layoff announcements today out of Ontario. You've got very serious issues coming out of certain leaders and politicians in Alberta and Saskatchewan in terms of those two provinces not feeling like they are being properly respected within Confederation. There's a lot of heavy lifting for this Parliament to do. And as the season turns, Canadians themselves are perhaps less inclined to be following the day in, the day out of the political machinations, and more just looking to Parliament and government to get it done.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. President of the Angus Reid Institute, Shachi Kurl, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, time for a quick break, but when we come back, we'll have our front bench here. Sabrina Grover, Melanie Paradis, and Gurritan Singh, they're all standing by, and we're going to have a preview of Carney's first sit-down with Donald Trump. Stay right there, because Power Play will be right back.
On Tuesday, I had a very constructive call with President Trump, and we agreed to meet next Tuesday in Washington. Our focus will be on both immediate trade pressures and the broader future economic and security relationship between our two sovereign nations. My government will fight to get the best deal for Canada. We will take all the time necessary, but not more, in order to do so.
That was Prime Minister Mark Carney today talking about his upcoming meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump. Now, the two are expected to meet Tuesday in Washington. While Carney is managing expectations for what could come out of that meeting, the governor of California has also weighed in on it. In an interview set to air this weekend on Question Period with Vassy Kapelos, Governor Gavin Newsom had this advice for the Canadian delegation.
I hope this is a one-on-one meeting, because I think that will favor the kind of relationship that our two countries deserve. And I also appreciate your Prime Minister's assertiveness. Come in with the points of pride, principle, with the authority, the moral and formal authority he has as Prime Minister of a remarkable nation, Canada, and assert yourself. At the same time, it is about developing a relationship. And with Donald Trump, at the end of the day, it is all about relationships.
So what are the stakes for this meeting, and what does success look like for Prime Minister Mark Carney? Let's bring in the front bench. Sabrina Grover was a federal Liberal candidate in the 2021 election. She's now senior advisor at Spark Advocacy and North Star Public Affairs. Melanie Paradis is a former communications director to Erin O'Toole. She's now the president of Texture Communications. And former Ontario MPP Gurritan Singh, he's now vice president at Crestview Strategy. He's also the brother of federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. Can I take a moment and just say how much I've missed you guys, even though I saw some of you on the campaign trail? I'm just going to have that moment right now, because it's
very mutual. Very mutual.
We missed you too.
Is it reunited?
Yeah.
It's. I mean, what do the kids say? It's been a hot minute, and now my teenagers are cringing at home. But anyways, Sabrina, let's start with you on this one.
We're cringing a bit too.
What do you think? Yeah, what do you think success looks like for Mark Carney out of this meeting on Tuesday?
I think to start with, I'll be really interested to see what the format of the meeting is. I think for the most part, you've seen leaders take kind of a seat in the Oval Office, you've seen a ton of media around, and you've had kind of a very rough interaction, I'd say, between Donald Trump and whatever leader he's facing, one that kind of feels more like a spectacle than it does feel like a meeting. And so it'll be interesting to see whether or not the Carney team has negotiated something different, and whether or not the post-presser is in the White House the way it's always been, or something more formal looking, like we've traditionally seen with the United States press conferences. I think in terms of success, we've already seen success, right? The way that Donald Trump is now talking about Mark Carney and treating Canada is remarkably different than 4 months ago. And we're seeing a sincere level of respect that I think we haven't seen before, not only for Canada, but really for any government that Donald Trump has met with. So I think that's already a marker of success. I think beyond this, it'll be interesting to see what the outcomes are on tariffs. And I also imagine that they're going to talk about the G7, and it'll be interesting to see if Mr. Carney sets some boundaries or sets some standards on the table for what the G7 conversation will look like in just over a month here.
And Melanie, location and look are obviously really important. And I say that because there are some people that I've been speaking to inside of government that have been talking about this meeting and looking back at a previous meeting and using a verb, using the name of a world leader as a verb and saying they don't want to get Zelensky'd here. And we all remember what happened when Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was sitting there and was essentially berated by both J.D. Vance, the vice president, and President Donald Trump. How much is weighing on this Prime Minister's office, Mark Carney's office, to make sure that they mitigate any type of damage, even in that type of situation?
I mean, no pressure, but this is probably the most important meeting of the Prime Minister's career. And he's had a lot of important meetings in his time, and obviously before he was the Prime Minister. So I think that this is a big one. I'm reminded of when Prime Minister Trudeau met with President Trump the first time, and there was that handshake prep that they would do, because the President Trump has like a very aggressive handshake where he pulls you into him, and people were being caught off guard by this, and you would see these shots of people kind of flailing a bit and trying to like recoil from the handshake, and it was always just very awkward. And so there was actually like training and prep that went into that. So I would imagine that something very similar is what's happening in PMO right now, and preparing Carney for this meeting, and not wanting him to, it's so challenged. Like, you want to look strong, but you also want to be frankly kind of boring, because the goal of this meeting should be not to make news. Obviously, there's going to be news. Everyone's going to be watching, but you want this to be as calm, cool, and collected as possible. Ideally, you would have this meeting not make any news in the United States, because Trump won't have said anything that was particularly newsworthy to them, and that would be a win for us. But it's so unpredictable, and for that reason, you need to prep your leader, in this case the Prime Minister, for multiple scenarios, and just sort of throw things at him and prep, just like you would have done during the election for debate prep, and see how he responds to it, and coach him accordingly.
But Gerton, what strikes me here is that you have Mark Carney, who has said we're going to stand up to Donald Trump, and he's said in his stump speeches that we are going to go into this trade war and we will win. He has had some very strong language, and he's also talked about that relationship with the United States as we currently know it over. So what do you think that means he has to do going into this, especially since there is a whole cohort of Canadians that have said, yeah, we want somebody strong at the table, and it's got to be you?
I think what Canadians want is someone who's strong and also just effective. So the goal is not just to display strength. The goal is not to just ensure that there is a strong opposition to Donald Trump's language around taking the sovereignty of Canada or the attacks or whatever he has said. It's to demonstrate strength for the goal of negotiating in good faith and getting a result for Canadians. And I think the Prime Minister is going to have to ensure that in many ways this meeting does not become politicized, because we know that within America right now, there's this incredibly corrosive far-right extremism that really wants to attack anyone who is not bought into their version of this world. So we need to ensure that that political aspect of it is not being used as a tool, once again, to rile up that political base in America. And as the other panelists have said today, very much, I think a boring meeting is a good meeting. I think that's a successful meeting. strength is to ensure that the rhetoric is not continued. But then I think there will probably be some maybe mutual respect there, given the business background of the Prime Minister, where they can get down to brass tacks and really just come back with ultimately Donald Trump always says he wants a deal. And now it's up to Prime Minister Carney to get the best deal for Canadians.
Sabrina, how much handshake prep do you think they're doing right now to make sure that that moment is going to be okay?
Several handshakes, a lot of handshakes are happening. But what I'm also interested in is what else happens around that meeting, right? We've kind of been in election mode for the last 30 days or 500 days. I can't really remember. But who else becomes a key player besides just the cabinet ministers that are going to be around him, right? We saw Doug Ford making big moves earlier this year, being a really strong voice for Canada. And does that also play a role in this meeting or going forward? We saw a lot of negotiations happening with governors directly in the United States. Does that continue to happen? The governors now have a lot more problems today than they did when Donald Trump was first elected. And what role does Danielle Smith play, right? I think Danielle Smith has really been a linchpin in all of this for the Conservatives as well as for Canada, but not necessarily playing an effective role. And what role does she play in negotiating with the United States, and what length of room does Carney give her to do that?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see exactly where those premiers start to fit in, especially when you consider that in that stump speech that he gave every night at those rallies, he talked about having Doug Ford on Fox News every night to really be the thumb in the eye of the U.S. So anyways, that's to be continued. We're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, though, Carney's agenda and what are the next steps for both the Conservatives and the NDP when Parliament resumes later this month. The Front Bunch, we're going to discuss that right after this quick break.
I've already indicated to Mr. Poilievre that if it's the decision of him and the Conservative Party to trigger, if I can put it that way, a by-election, I will ensure that it happens as soon as possible. Okay. No games, nothing, straight.
Prime Minister Mark Carney this morning making it clear he will not keep Pierre Poilievre out of the House of Commons for his own political gain. Poilievre has proved himself to be an incredibly effective leader of the opposition. But without a seat in the House, he can't do that job. There is no doubt, though, Carney's first question period could be a little easier as both the Conservatives NDP and NDP will be looking for interim leaders. And I say interim because, of course, the Conservatives, once Pierre Poilievre comes back into the House and then a new seat, he will take that role again. Have a listen.
Mr. Carney, will you be pursuing a formal governing pact of any kind with the NDP?
No. Short answer, no.
And why not?
Why? That's my response. Is we campaigned on a very clear set of objectives, very clear policies to back those up, and we received the highest number of votes in Canadian history. Yes, obviously, by definition in Parliament, we will need to get majority support to pass legislation. But this is legislation that Canadians, or at least we will be putting forth legislation that's consistent with our platform and consistent with the requirements of the time.
So Mark Carney, they're clearly saying he's not in any rush to have any kind of coalition, essentially ruling it out. So what does that mean about how he and his party will try and govern? Let's bring back the front bench. Sabrina Grover, Melanie Paradis, and Gurdatin Singh. I want to start with you quickly on this one, Sabrina. Given what he said there, do you think that he's just basically going to try and govern as if he has a majority?
I think that he's going to create policy and legislation like he has a majority. And as he mentioned, a lot of that policy is what Canadians voted for and what Canadians are looking for. I think otherwise, he wouldn't have received, and the Liberals wouldn't have received the support that they did in this election. I think that there's certainly going to be room to negotiate and bring in ideas from the NDP or the other opposition parties. And I can't imagine a situation where we wouldn't see that, especially given how, I think magnanimous serious and open it feels like Mr. Carney is going to be as Prime Minister. And I think that at the end of the day, we have to do what's in the best interest of Canada. The serious questions that lay before us are the questions about Donald Trump in the United States. I think that it is in the interest of all parties to negotiate, in good faith on that, and to build as much as they can in terms of internal trade and economic strength and resilience in Canada. And I think that that's going to be the priorities of the day. It looks already like we're seeing less toxicity going into this session than we have in the last 18 months. I think that's positive, and I really think that's what Canadians want.
All right, I'm going to spend the next two questions here essentially looking back, because the two parties, the Conservatives and the NDP, they are obviously in a state where not only are they basically trying to figure out the next steps forward, especially the NDP, but Melanie, I wanted to ask you specifically about where Pierre Poilievre went with not only his leadership, but also with the party, because there is a bit of an argument here for the Conservatives not being moderate anymore, because Pierre Poilievre grew the party in that way, in a way that other leaders hadn't. And it's interesting because your old boss, Erin O'Toole, tried to have a more moderate Conservative party. So what do you think that means for the Conservatives going forward when you consider the gains that Poilievre made, but also the part of the political spectrum that he did not go ahead and get?
Look, I think it's important to put this in the context of the moment that each of these leaders served. So Erin O'Toole served during COVID. It was an incredibly different time period. It was a very different election. The issue set was different. The Conservative voter coalition was fundamentally different. One of the things that Pierre Poilievre was able to do in his leadership in the past 2 years and in this election was appeal to a much younger demographic than the Conservatives have frankly ever been able to do before. And in part, that's because of the focus that he has had for the past 2 years that he's been leader on housing affordability in particular, and the broken promise of what it means to live the Canadian dream, and whether or not young people are going to be able to own a home and start a family. And that's a message that he really zeroed in on, and he was able to attract a much younger demographic to the Conservative Party. And I hope that we're able to continue building on that voter coalition. He also made great strides in working with unions, with labor groups. I think that's also an important area to continue doing work and to continue growing the Conservative share of the vote in Northern Ontario and places like that. Like, the map for after this election is completely different than it was a couple weeks ago. Like, it's an astonishingly different voter coalition. I think there's still some things we need to learn from this election, like we need to be able to appeal to boomers again. So there's definitely still work ahead, but he's made incredible strides.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And maybe the way to appeal to boomers is potentially not with a golf commercial, but that is probably a question for another day. Gerdetin, I know how difficult this might be for you because he is your brother. But I'm going to ask you this. How do people separate Jagmeet Singh's election failures from how the NDP is trying to frame his gains right now?
So I think undoubtedly we have to recognize that the results were what the results were. And from the NDP perspective, a lot of folks, I think it was just very difficult to get that narrative of pushing the NDP in when there's this huge threat of Trump. What ultimately happened is that NDP voters who care deeply about Canada, they decided to throw their votes in a place to stop the Conservatives from making gains, because the fear of an extreme right-wing version of the Conservative Party under Pierre Poilievre was so unpalatable to NDPers that they decided to go down the strategic route. A strategic route which I would argue was not successful and ultimately elected more Conservatives than progressives. But when we look at now what the NDP's position is, well, first off, there's a lot to celebrate. The fact that we see millions of Canadians who are now going to have access to dental care, and a commitment that has been continued by the Prime Minister. We have the foundation of pharmacare, we have child care, we have anti-scab legislation, we have a national school food program. The list goes on and on and on. 10 federal paid sick days. This is the legacy of Jagmeet Singh and his work in getting actual programs done for working people across this country. And that's something that the NDP can now look to say that it doesn't matter whether they have 7 people in Parliament or 25 people in Parliament. Whenever the NDP has a position to use its power, it'll use its power for the benefit of people. And that was something we saw over the past years under the leadership of Jagmeet Singh, and we'll continue to see that under the future leadership of whatever NDP leader is elected, because ultimately I think that's what makes Canada beautiful. We have this differences of party. We're not just black or white. We have a multitude of colors in between. And in this context, we have the NDP, which can really push forward for social programming that helps folks across the board.
But Gurton, I just wanted to ask you, do you think that that type of play that your brother tried in the last couple of weeks, and essentially saying that he will do anything he can to try and block a Conservative government and or making sure that Conservatives don't get elected? I mean, there are a number of seats out west, particularly in BC, that are usually sort of orange-blue, and they didn't go orange. So do you think that it was effective in how he tried to communicate that message when you consider how many seats that the NDP has now and how many seats the Conservatives have?
So undoubtedly, the results are not what the NDP wanted. There's no way to spin that in any way, shape, or form. Of course, there's a time where the NDP needs to sit back and reflect and think about how to improve this kind of approach in the future. I do think it was a unique circumstance because we had this threat of Trump and the continual attacks upon our sovereignty. The economic war being waged upon Canada by way of tariffs is something that really created this polarization where people just wanted to vote for whatever would, I think, provide a clear opposition to Trump, but also prevent what was perceived as Pierre, who would not be strong towards Trump, a Pierre leadership, which often sounded really Trumpy. And I think that's ultimately what prevented him from winning an election that 4 months ago was supposed to be something that was in the bag for Pierre. Right? He had 20-point lead, the Conservatives. They lost a 20-point lead. They did not form government. Pierre lost his own seat. So I think there's also, I see a really lot of spin going on in the Conservatives, but the reality is where they should have been and where they ended up is very, very much a lack of progress when you look at the past 4 months. So I think what ultimately we need to look towards is the legacy of what the NDP has done. I think irrespective of political plays, that's something that's tangible. That's something that's clear. Millions of people getting access to dental care, the pharmacare programs, childcare, and more. This is what the NDP can turn to. That's the root of what this party does, helps people out. And I think moving forward, that's what they'll continue to focus on.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there for this Friday. Gurton Singh, Melanie Paradis, Sabrina Grover, thank you all. Great to see you again. We'll see you next Friday. Stay with us, though. Today's takeaway is just ahead here on Power Play. For tonight's takeaway, I wanted to take a moment to reflect on the last 5 or 6 weeks of this campaign. Spending all that time on the road has really given me an amazing opportunity to meet so many Canadians and see so much of this beautiful country. Seeing how involved people were in politics was just incredible. I want to thank each and every one of you who came up to me to say hi and to tell me that you appreciate the work of this team here on Power Play. You are the reason that we do this, and we appreciate your support. That is your Power Play Week in Politics. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. Have yourselves a great weekend, but stay with us, though, because today's top headlines are just ahead.